Let's dive into Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Taleb.
Okay.
It's a book that really pulls back the curtain on how much randomness uh, impacts our lives,
Interesting.
especially in markets and investing.
Okay.
Taleb, who's a fellow at the current Institute of Mathematical Sciences at New York University,
Hmm.
and also founded Empirica Capital, which is a successful hedge fund.
Right.
He's also in the Derivative Strategy Hall of Fame.
Impressive.
Really pushes us to think about how often we mistake luck for skill
I see.
and get caught up in trends that seem predictable.
Makes sense.
He explores some really fascinating areas, like if you're so rich, why aren't you so smart?
Hmm.
A bizarre accounting method, and survival of the least fit, can evolution be fooled by randomness?
Those are some catchy chapter titles for sure. They definitely make you want to keep reading.
Absolutely.
It sounds like he's really trying to get us to examine how we think about uncertainty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he starts off with this really captivating story about Croesus.
Oh, I've heard of him.
He was the super rich king of Lydia and Solon.
A wise Greek legislator.
Right. Imagine Croesus, surrounded by all this luxury and wealth.
It sounds like a pretty comfortable life.
He asks Solon who the happiest man alive is.
What an interesting question. I wonder what Solon's response was.
Well, you'd think Croesus had it all figured out, right?
I mean, it would be easy to assume that with all that wealth, he must have been pretty content.
But Solon's answer really turns that assumption on its head.
I see.
He basically tells Croesus that it's foolish to base your happiness solely on your current fortune, because fate is unpredictable.
Right.
He emphasizes that true happiness goes beyond just external factors like wealth.
So it's more about inner peace and fulfillment rather than material possessions.
Exactly. It's a really powerful reminder that even seemingly secure and affluent lives can be disrupted by chance.
I can see how that story really sets the stage for the book's overall theme.
It does. And this leads us to one of Taleb's intriguing characters,
Okay.
Nero Tulip.
Interesting name.
Unlike Croesus, who's kind of blinded by his wealth, Nero takes a much more cautious approach to trading.
How so?
He focuses on minimizing his losses instead of always chasing those huge gains.
Oh, he's more risk-averse.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is his unusual path to becoming a trader.
Oh, tell me more.
He studied philosophy and literature before getting a PhD in mathematical finance.
Wow, that's quite a diverse background for a trader. You don't see that every day.
It makes you wonder how those different ways of thinking impact financial decisions.
For sure. Like, how does a philosopher approach risk assessment compared to a mathematician?
Precisely. Now let's contrast Nero with John,
Okay.
another trader who embodies that more conventional high-stakes style.
So more of a gambler.
In a way, he's bold, ambitious, and laser-focused on those big wins.
The stereotypical Wall Street type.
He's got the Ivy League education, the thriving bond trading career.
All the trappings of success.
Exactly. So we have these two contrasting approaches to trading.
Makes sense.
Risk aversion versus all-out profit-seeking.
Right. Then what happens?
Well, then comes September 1998, which Taleb calls the red-hot summer.
Oh.
The Russian market crashes unexpectedly.
I see where this is going.
And John, despite all his experience and credentials,
This is a lot of money.
a substantial amount.
Wow, that really highlights how even expertise and experience can't always predict these market shifts.
Exactly. It underscores the ever-present influence of chance.
It makes you wonder if there are other factors at play beyond just knowledge and skill.
And that's where Taleb brings in a surprising element:
What's that?
biology.
Biology.
He suggests that success in trading might be linked more to our biological makeup,
Interesting.
specifically how we handle risk and stress, than just skill alone.
So some people might be biologically predisposed to thrive in those high-pressure environments.
That's what he's proposing. He delves into the connection between serotonin levels and risk-taking behavior.
That really challenges the assumption that success is solely a product of hard work and intelligence.
It does. And to further challenge our perceptions of success,
He compares traders to dentists.
you got it. He argues that statistically, a dentist is more likely to accumulate wealth than a trader.
Really? That's surprising.
It's because of the inherent stability of dentistry compared to the volatility of the market.
Makes sense. It's a good reminder that sometimes those less glamorous professions can lead to more consistent wealth building.
Exactly. It forces us to reevaluate our definition of success.
Definitely. I'm curious to hear more about how Taleb challenges our assumptions about success and the role of randomness.
Me too. We'll explore that more in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it. Last time we were talking about how even dentists might be better at building wealth than traders on Wall Street.
Right. It's fascinating.
Let's explore why it's so easy to be fooled by randomness.
Okay.
Our minds tend to play tricks on us.
Like optical illusions, but for our thinking.
Exactly. These are called cognitive biases.
They kind of warp how we see and understand things.
And lead us to make bad decisions, especially about chance events. Taleb kicks this off with a really provocative statement. Too many millionaires next door. He introduces this guy named Mark, who lives in a fancy Manhattan neighborhood.
Yeah.
But Mark feels poor compared to his neighbors.
Because they're all Wall Street hotshots.
Many of them are corporate executives or big-time investors.
I can see why he'd feel insecure.
It's easy to compare ourselves to those around us.
Especially in places where wealth and status are so visible.
Taleb says Mark is falling for a classic case of survivorship bias.
Survivorship bias.
He's only focusing on the winners, those who struck it rich.
But not the ones who tried and failed.
Exactly. Like looking at a forest and only seeing the tallest trees.
Without noticing the saplings that never grew or the fallen giants hidden below.
It's like having a skewed perspective.
So we're missing the full picture.
And it gets even more complicated.
How so?
Taleb introduces the idea of double survivorship bias.
Double.
We not only notice those who succeeded,
But the information we get about them is filtered.
it's all positive and often exaggerated.
So we don't hear about all the people who tried to get rich quick and lost everything.
Their failures stay hidden.
Leaving us with a distorted view of the risks involved.
Right. And Taleb uses this to critique a popular book called The Millionaire Next Door.
I've heard of that one.
He argues that it perpetuates these biases by fixating on the habits of the wealthy.
Without acknowledging the role of luck.
Exactly. Just because certain traits are common among millionaires,
Doesn't mean those traits caused their wealth.
it's correlation, not causation.
Like maybe frugality helps,
Yeah.
but it's not a guarantee of riches.
Especially if you don't have the right temperament or luck to navigate the market.
Makes sense. It's not as simple as following a recipe for success.
Taleb then introduces another interesting concept, visibility winners.
Visibility winners.
He argues that the most visible people, those who shout about their achievements the loudest,
aren't always the most skilled or talented.
it's an important distinction. In a world obsessed with media and self-promotion,
Those who are good at marketing themselves might get more attention.
even if others are quietly doing amazing work behind the scenes.
This ties into how our perception of randomness is further distorted by the stories we hear.
We love stories with simple explanations, clear heroes and villains, and a sense of predictability.
But real life is rarely that neat and tidy.
A good story can be really compelling even if it's not entirely accurate.
Taleb uses a funny example to illustrate this.
What's that?
He compares buying and selling an egg.
To managing a hedge fund.
Yeah. He argues that buying and selling an egg is much more predictable.
Less prone to random events,
It's a clever way to show how we overestimate our ability to predict things.
especially in areas where chance plays a big role.
This brings us to a common mistake investors make.
Relying too much on past performance.
Exactly. Taleb talks about placebo investors.
Placebo investors.
They were given fake results, made up data. But even with meaningless information,
People still try to find patterns and explanations.
our minds are wired to seek meaning even where there is none.
It can make us believe we found a winning formula when it's all just luck.
And then there's this concept called ergodicity.
Oh, okay.
Imagine this. Just because the average person lives to 80,
Doesn't mean you are guaranteed to live that long.
ergodicity reminds us that individual experiences can vary greatly from averages,
So past performance isn't always a reliable predictor of future results.
especially in fields where luck and randomness have a big impact.
To illustrate this, Taleb creates a scenario with 10,000 imaginary investment managers.
Using a coin flip to make decisions.
Right, even with a 50-50 chance.
Some managers inevitably go on these incredible winning streaks purely due to chance.
And others will struggle even if they're doing the exact same thing.
It can create the illusion of skill when it's all just random,
This has big implications for how we evaluate expertise.
especially in finance where randomness can really skew the results.
It's crucial to separate genuine skill from lucky streaks.
Otherwise, we might make bad judgments based on misleading data.
He also talks about data snooping.
Data snooping.
It's our tendency to keep searching for patterns until we find one.
Even if that pattern is meaningless.
It's like connecting the dots randomly and forcing a picture to emerge.
We can always find something if we look hard enough.
Even if it's just a coincidence.
Speaking of coincidences,
Taleb tells a story about a mysterious letter.
predicting a market downturn.
Yeah, it arrived on January 2nd and seemed to know the future.
But it turned out to be just a lucky guess.
It's easy to be fooled by events that seem improbable.
We often assign meaning to them when they might just be random.
He also talks about the birthday paradox.
The what?
It's this counterintuitive idea that in a group of just 23 people,
There's a good chance 2 of them will share a birthday.
more than a 50% chance.
Really? That seems strange.
It shows how our intuition about probability can be wrong.
We underestimate the likelihood of seemingly unlikely events.
Then there's the small world phenomenon.
That we're all connected through a few degrees of separation.
Exactly. And our tendency to be amazed by these connections.
Makes us see patterns where there might be none.
It's like our brains are programmed to find meaning in connections.
Even if they're based on chance.
Taleb shares a funny story about being mistaken for someone else.
And getting praised for a book he didn't write.
John Dos Passos' The 42nd Parallel.
It's a lighthearted way to show how we judge things based on surface impressions.
Instead of forming our own opinions.
Next, he talks about the backtester.
A software program used by traders.
It lets them test strategies against historical data.
Sounds useful.
But Taleb warns against relying on it too much.
Why?
Backtesting can create a false sense of certainty.
And lead to overly complex strategies that don't work in real markets.
He then tells a cautionary tale about Omega Trade Station.
A fictional software program.
It was designed to find profitable trading strategies using past data.
I see the problem.
Even with tons of data, it's almost impossible to build a system that consistently beats the market.
Because of randomness and unforeseen events?
Then he shifts to the world of medicine. It's surprisingly difficult to separate real cures from placebo effects.
And misleading results can get amplified by the media.
We often trust medical authorities without question.
Especially when their claims align with our hopes and beliefs.
He uses the example of supposed cancer cures.
Anecdotal evidence can be mistaken for scientific proof.
Even when studies contradict those claims.
It's important to be skeptical and prioritize evidence-based research.
Then he tells a story about a professor trying to demonstrate randomness to his students.
And accidentally finding a flaw in a roulette wheel.
Exactly. It highlights how even seemingly random events can be influenced by hidden factors.
We might not even be aware of them.
Finally, Taleb addresses a misconception in journalism and research.
Focusing on statistically significant results.
While ignoring those that might be informative but don't meet certain thresholds.
This can distort our understanding of the world.
We might miss valuable insights if we only focus on what's statistically significant.
So what's the takeaway from all of this?
Taleb wants us to develop a deeper understanding of randomness and cognitive biases.
We need to recognize our susceptibility to these mental traps.
And find ways to mitigate your influence.
It's not about being paralyzed by fear.
It's about embracing uncertainty and developing a more robust approach to decision-making.
In a world where randomness is unavoidable.
So we've seen how random events can really mess things up, even the best laid plans.
Right.
And how our minds can trick us into seeing patterns that aren't actually there.
Definitely.
But how do we use this knowledge? How do we make choices? Especially financial ones, when the world is so full of chance.
It's not about eliminating risk altogether. That's impossible.
Yeah.
The key is to understand how randomness works, and then build a framework for dealing with uncertainty in a way that aligns with our goals and values.
So we need a strategy for navigating the unknown.
Exactly.
Taleb introduces this idea of the sandpile effect. Imagine you're carefully building a sandcastle on the beach. Grain by grain.
It seems
Movable for a while, but then one tiny grain
causes a whole section to collapse.
It's a powerful analogy for how small events can have huge consequences.
Especially in complex systems like financial markets.
They're so sensitive to even the slightest change.
A tiny input can lead to massive, unpredictable outputs.
This reminds me of the QWERTY keyboard.
The one we use every day.
It seems so random, but it's actually a result of historical constraints.
Early typewriters would jam if keys were too close together.
So they came up with this weird layout.
And it's stuck with us ever since.
It's fascinating how these past events shape the present.
In ways we might not even realize.
This leads to a bigger question about how randomness shows up in the world.
Both in nature and in human-made systems.
We try to impose order and predictability.
But chance is always there.
It often defies our attempts to control it.
Taleb challenges the idea that we can fully understand complex systems using just math.
Okay.
Math is powerful.
But it has its limits.
Especially when dealing with systems that are full of ambiguity
and feedback loops.
and the potential for unexpected events.
He uses this philosophical thought experiment called Buridan's donkey.
Buridan's donkey.
Imagine a donkey standing between two identical bales of hay.
Okay.
It can't decide which one to eat.
So it starves to death.
It's a funny but insightful example.
It shows how our rational decision-making can get stuck.
When faced with uncertainty,
We can become paralyzed.
leading to inaction or bad outcomes,
Sometimes the best thing to do is just pick a direction and go,
instead of getting bogged down in endless analysis.
especially when randomness is involved.
But Taleb doesn't leave us feeling hopeless about all this randomness.
No.
He also explores how our brains are actually wired to deal with probability and uncertainty.
We have this built-in probability blindness.
Probability blindness,
It's about how our brains evolved to make quick judgments,
based on limited information.
which was crucial for survival.
But those same instincts can mislead us.
When we're dealing with complex probabilities and statistics,
Give me an example.
imagine you have to choose between a trip to Paris or the Bahamas.
Okay.
Both options have equal probability.
But one is framed in a more appealing way
We might overestimate the likelihood of events that feel good.
and underestimate those that feel bad.
Our emotions can cloud our judgment.
Taleb shares a personal story about a time he misjudged a medical situation.
Oh.
He initially dismissed some worrying symptoms.
But eventually realized it was serious and got medical help. That's scary.
It shows that even those who understand probability and risk,
Can still fall prey to cognitive biases,
sometimes we need to seek expert advice.
especially when dealing with complex or potentially dangerous situations.
This leads to a discussion of how our evolutionary past has shaped our decision-making
Our brains are wired to prioritize immediate threats,
and react quickly.
even if those reactions aren't always statistically optimal.
It makes sense in a way,
We evolved in environments where threats were constant,
so we had to be ready to act fast.
even if it meant making less than perfect choices.
Then Taleb brings up the O.J. Simpson trial.
One of the most famous trials in history
He argues that even the legal system, with its emphasis on evidence and logic,
is still vulnerable to cognitive biases,
the defense team successfully played on the jury's emotions,
focusing on personal stories rather than statistical probabilities.
which ultimately influenced the verdict,
It highlights the tension between our intuitive understanding of the world.
and a more statistically informed perspective,
We need to be aware of this tension,
especially when the stakes are high.
and our emotions can easily cloud our judgment.
He then shifts gears to the work of psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky.
They revolutionized our understanding of decision-making,
Their research showed how people make irrational choices.
especially when faced with uncertainty,
They challenged the traditional economic models.
which assumed that humans are always rational,
Their work gave rise to behavioral economics.
which acknowledges the role of emotions and biases in our decisions.
Finally, we get to the last chapter.
Where Taleb offers advice on how to cope with the emotional roller coaster of trading.
He draws a surprising parallel between traders and dentists.
Both professions involve uncertainty, risk, and the potential for both success and failure.
The key is to manage the emotional ups and downs,
Taleb argues that one of the biggest mistakes traders make
is focusing too much on short-term fluctuations.
and ignoring the long-term probabilities.
He advocates for a more detached approach.
Based on understanding statistics and managing risk,
Instead of getting caught up in the emotional swings of the market,
this leads to a discussion of how our perception of probability is often distorted by the media,
especially financial news,
which tends to sensationalize events.
and fixate on short-term market movements,
It's a reminder to be critical of the information we consume.
and not make impulsive decisions based on emotional headlines.
Taleb concludes with a powerful metaphor for navigating a world full of randomness.
The black swan.
It represents those unexpected events
That completely disrupt our assumptions.
and force us to reevaluate our understanding of the world,
He suggests that instead of trying to predict these black swan events,
which is often impossible,
we should focus on building resilience and adaptability.
so we can weather the storms and come out stronger on the other side.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Fooled by Randomness, what are the key takeaways we can apply to our own lives?
Well, first, remember that randomness is everywhere. We can't escape it.
Okay.
Second, accept that our predictions are often wrong.
Makes sense.
Third, cultivate a more nuanced and statistically informed approach to decision-making.
It's not about being reckless.
It's about acknowledging uncertainty and finding ways to navigate it.
We need to blend careful analysis with a healthy dose of skepticism.
And be willing to adapt to unexpected events.
Fooled by randomness is a powerful reminder that we're all prone to illusions.
Especially when dealing with uncertainty.
By understanding randomness and the cognitive biases that shape our thinking,
We can make better choices and navigate the complexities of life with more clarity and resilience.
thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Fooled by Randomness. It's been an insightful journey.
I agree. It's definitely given us a lot to think about.